Glenn Fleshler, welcome to An Actor Despairs. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It means so much to me, man. Like, I've talked about this with a lot of actors on the podcast. We were just talking about Shea Wiggum, and, there's the difference between good actors and great actors is like, good actors, there's personality and there's room for that, but great actors, there's nothing like, there's so much nuance and existence and choices made that only that actor could have played that role. And you have been one of those actors that, like, everything that you've done, like the first thing I saw you in was Spring Awakening, which was my freshman year at NYU.
Oh, right.
And I read your bio and I was like, oh, he's at NYU. I should follow his career. So I kind of watched it with a watchful eye. And then you just kind of like have set such a standard for all us actors about achieving brilliance and what you can do with characters. You make such like defined choices. And I have so much admiration and respect for your craft, and watching you work is like, it's a masterclass. Anytime I see you, it's just like, it's like rooting for the home team. I've spoke about this with an actor named Elliot Villar who was on the podcast.
I know Elliot.
Yeah. Elliot's a good friend. And if you look at acting as a form of athleticism, I've watched you spar with some of the greatest actors in the world and emerge victorious every time. So I'm so grateful for all that you've done. And you've really been a real hero of mine of just like setting the standard about, when I audition, I'm kind of like, well, what would Glenn Fleshler do with this character? And it's pushed me a lot. So I owe you big time for that.
Thank you. That's very kind. I don't know if I can live up to that.
Yeah, you certainly have, man. But I usually like to start at the beginning. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Queens, New York.
Wow.
And I think, it affected my acting because, I felt like I lived nowhere. It was sort of like kind of nondescript. Halfway between the city and the beach. So I guess that was what you could say was a plus, is you could get to the city, you could get to the beach in under an hour. But
Rockaway being the beach?
Or Jones Beach.
Oh,
but
Jones
we did
Beach.
go to Rockaway quite a bit as a kid. But I mean, like Long Island and then Manhattan. All I really cared about was Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I just like looking across the river, dreaming of being in the city, Broadway, all of that.
So you did enjoy growing up here?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
Yeah. I love New York.
That's
I
amazing.
love New York like crazy. But something about Queens, I always felt just like in between. I was like in this in between land. But there was, a great cultural shift that happened from the time I grew up to now in the neighborhood where I was. It was like almost Long Island.
Yeah.
Waves of immigration came through there.
Yeah.
Went from being largely Catholic and Jewish to then Koreans, then Indian and Pakistani. A lot of different ethnic groups sort of came through there. So that was interesting. But New York is like that in
it's
general.
an
If you're an
amalgamation.
actor, you can observe people and, it's a feast. You're just getting on the subway, if you're interested in character.
Yeah, totally. What did your parents do?
My parents were both professors, particularly early in my life. My mother had a kind of career change midway through. But, so they were kind of intellectuals, but they were great lovers of the arts.
Wow.
So that was part of it. I mean, they always said that I was born, acting. So, there's not, I don't have that definitive moment for you. It's like thousands of moments.
Of course.
But definitely, we watch TV. My mother was really into like old movies. We went to a lot of Broadway.
You did.
And it became like a thing because
Wow.
they saw how into it I got that my birthday every year we'd go to a Broadway show, and I remember my father, we'd go out to eat and my father would start like snaking down the streets and making sharp turns. I had to like follow him through the crowds in Midtown Manhattan, and I'd be looking at the marquees and going like, is it going to be this show? Is it going to be this?
Yeah.
It didn't matter because I loved them all. I mean, I
Totally.
ate it all up at that point. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
Did you get to see some pretty cool stuff?
Oh my God, it was all amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, my mother says the first Broadway show we went to was Grease, the
Wow.
original production of Grease. And my mother always tells the story of how I didn't want to get up at intermission because I was afraid they would start without me. And I was so
That's amazing.
transfixed. And we saw the original Wiz and the original Pippin and, Annie and all that stuff. And then my parents were great, like, theater subscribers, so they would come home with these programs from the Shadow Box and all these like more serious plays, and I always wanted to do what the grown-ups were doing, you know what I mean? I was like rather than watching anime. I mean, I watch cartoons and stuff, but rather than like wanting to go to the Disney movies, I wanted to go to, I was like, what was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Yeah.
Like, what's that about? And like, I remember seeing like Silkwood when I was, still not a little kid, but like, a little young to understand it, but I was like just on the verge of understanding it, and I knew I was watching something amazing by the way these people related. I'd never seen, Meryl Streep and Kurt Russell and Cher are living together, and they just had these really real, fights with each other, but you could feel the love between them.
Totally.
And that's a whole long story about Meryl and Mike Nichols. And
were you like exposed to any of like the downtown theater? Because I know there was like the Wooster Group and so many.
Oh, that was much later, but yes. I mean, I basically, if we're talking really early influences, I also was a kid when Saturday Night Live first came on the air.
Wow.
And I have a sister and brother who are 5 and 7 years older than me, so I was a little bit, the kid left to my own devices. That's probably why I became an actor, looking for attention.
Child.
Like, I'm here too, and,
pay attention.
My parents used to say, "Oh, you were such a good baby. We would play tennis, and we could just leave you on a hill."
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Well, that's why I'm all messed up." But anyway, Saturday Night Live was a big influence because my brother, he was even young for it, I guess, but he was like, getting into the teenage years and could just sort of sniff the idea of like sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
I, didn't know what all that was referring to yet, but I saw his response to it, and he would let me stay up if my parents were out.
Yeah.
And then I'd race up to bed, and if I saw the headlights come, they'd come back from a play in the city on a Saturday night. But I was hooked instantly, and just the energy of that and what they were talking about, that generation that sort of came out of the 60s into the rock and roll 70s, and we're finally getting like, television exposure of like their perspective, and seeing Belushi for the first time. And I was like obsessed with Chevy Chase for a period of years, and Gilda, and, there's just that incredible energy and the daring of their performance and transforming into different people. I mean, that had
that was the prime of SNL,
it was just there's nothing like it. And of course I've loved the show ever since, and there have been all different iterations of it and different energies, but there was nothing like the kind of rock and roll vibe of that first cast.
So then what was like the first performance that you did? Did you enter like a drama school, or?
I mean, as a little kid, I would get up and do talent shows in 5th and 6th grade, and I would just do impressions.
Nice. Being influenced by SNL, then obviously, like doing impressions,
and everything else. I mean, we watched the Carol Burnett show, early Billy Crystal. I watched the old school. I'd try to like stay up late and watch the Tonight Show and see the comedians on there. I had a lot of different influences. I mean, I was into music, I was into comedy, I was into dramatic stuff. Although I didn't get to see as much of it as I wanted to.
Yeah.
I would listen to Casey Kasem and the top 40, stuff, and I knew all the songs, and I kind of lost that along the way. But, like I said, going to Broadway, so I didn't know where I was going to fit into any of this, or what I had skills for. But I just sort of had this like feeling of like I can do that, particularly where acting was concerned, because I didn't understand what went into it. And I just thought it was kind of this magic, but then I also thought it was sort of nothing. It was just like people being there and talking. So I just, it was like the duality. I know you've talked about this with other people, of like how actors, we kind of, have this incredible confidence, and then you have this incredible lack of confidence, and you go back and forth. I had, I think both of those things playing. Part of it was like being a kid from Queens and looking across the river at Manhattan and thinking like, there's no way. Like, who am I,
Totally.
And then this other little cocky kid thing where you're just like, I can do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that.
Totally.
I'm going to be like, this big,
that childlike dream, wonder. Totally.
So I did that. I think I played Curly in Oklahoma in like 6th grade.
Oh, wow.
I did like a play about New York, where I played Peter Minuet. Maybe that was 4th grade. So I was like, wanted to be in the class plays and whatever that was. The transformative thing later was both my brother and sister had been involved in something we had in our high school called Sing, which they made a movie about, and they did, I don't know if they still do it in New York, but it was all around New York City and maybe the state, in different schools where the classes would compete, and they'd each put on a show based on a theme.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty big deal. And to a little kid, my brother was like on the stage crew or something. He wasn't into performing.
Yeah.
But I would go see it, and to me that was like as good as a Broadway show.
Yeah.
In fact, as a kid, I would go see my cousins in plays and stuff. Community theater, we'd go to, if we were on vacation up in like Vermont or somewhere, we'd go to the little playhouses there. It was all showbiz to me. I mean, it was all like, I could be in like a middle school auditorium and hear like a rickety, band starting to warm up, and I would get chills. I'd be like, a show's going to happen.
Yeah, I got to get on the stage.
Yeah, I just loved it. I loved it. So anyway, this show, Sing, it was just high school kids performing, but to me it was like unbelievable. And there were little inside jokes about the principal and all this stuff. And what you would do is you would barter with the other classes for whatever the hot songs were, and you would use that music. So no one had to compose music because none of us knew how to do that.
Yeah.
But then you would write lyrics to those songs.
What a cool idea.
And you would, and the three, all shows would, all perform in an evening, and then there would be a winner. You'd have a little alma mater song at the end for each class. And so I was hooked on that, and I ended up writing and directing and starring in 3 musicals in high school.
Way.
I just took the thing over. Wow. I had different partners along the way. And
was there like a LaGuardia of Queens, or this was just a normal
No,
public?
This was just a high school. We didn't have a theater program or anything. Wow. So this was a student run. There was like 1 faculty person assigned, and then there'd be 2 seniors who would be like the commissioners, and they would like keep it all on the up and up between the classes. And it was kind of a crazy power trip because I didn't know anything, but yet I was like directing the actors, and then I would go like downstairs and see the scene painters and check out what they were doing for like the backdrops, and then I'd go in with the band and hear what they were doing, and then I'd go look at the choreographer and see what she's doing, and then there was like a chorus director who would deal with all the chorus for the singing part of it, and so, and sometimes I wrote those musicals in a night because I had grown up seeing the shows. Like I knew the structure.
Totally.
And then we had a theme, and, we'd try to meet as a group and try to write together, which is like impossible.
Yeah.
And eventually, the first time, I remember I just went home and I was like, I'm going to do that. I think I stayed up all night and I just like cranked out. And then they looked at me like I was a god or something. They were like, where did this come from? And like, how did you do this? And I remember even my mother thinking like I was going to go into comedy writing because I could write lyrics to these songs and just make them rhyme. And, it was, I don't know if it was anything, although I wrote, it was when the Thriller album came out, Michael Jackson.
The best of all time.
I wrote a song called Eat It to beat it. And then a couple of years later, Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, did you send him a cease and desist?
Made $1 zillion on that. So I always thought, I had a few moments there where I was like, oh, something was really happening there. But, so that was that's pretty much my early performance. At that point, I had no idea how I was going to really go forward.
And when you went to college, did you study acting or?
Yeah, I went to SUNY Albany, upstate New York. My parents were like, "You're going to a state school."
Yeah.
I sort of, it made me academically kind of, I was always in like the good classes, the smart classes. And I was taking all of these AP classes in high school, but I didn't take any of the tests. I started coasting because I was like, I'm going to be an actor, know? And then I went to Albany, which was like a business school. It wasn't known for theater, and we had a sort of liberal arts theater education. But I got to play the leads in all the shows. And at some point, I'm sure other people told you this kind of story, but my parents always wanted me to have something to fall back on, and I became an English major. Like I don't know how I was going to fall back on that, but I just thought like that was safer. And then eventually a teacher talked me into like, oh, I've had students who've become journalists and all these different things, this theater teacher. And I not only became a theater major, but then I became what was called a departmental theater major, which meant I didn't have a minor. It was like 54 credits in theater. Yeah. And so I took acting, voice, and movement there, and I took all the theater history classes, dramatic literature, which was good because it sort of force-fed me all the background stuff, knowing all the plays and, a little bit of the theater history. And I love that stuff. I mean, I love studying about acting. Like you're very passionate about actors that you see. I always loved that. Even the actors who'd gone before me at that little college, I wanted to know, like, who is that person and where did they end up? And, I'm always fascinated by that. So, I started doing plays there, and I got to play Oedipus there. I got to play Tartuffe. I got to play major, huge roles that I was not remotely prepared for, probably, but I just sort of like flicked the switch and got really cocky and was like, I'm going to do this, and I devoured it. I had years where I did maybe like 20 plays in a year.
Wow.
And it's all I wanted to be doing.
And when you had this dream, like did film and TV? Obviously, I know it had a big impact on you with Carol Burnett, SNL. But like, did you have an idea of like?
I mean, I had a year in undergrad. Some people I went to college with could attest to this, where I just did nothing but talk like Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon. I started to devour the stuff that, when I referred to like being too young for certain movies, and wanting to know that's, and then you start, watching The Godfather over and over and, all the great 70s movies and all that icons that we all grew up with. I started to devour all that stuff. Yes, that was always a big part of it for me. And again, going back to seeing I did finally see Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That was one of those defining performances where I was like, I can't believe an actor can do this and just take me on this ride and have such charisma and such, power of transformation. And I just, I'm still blown away by it.
Yeah.
Probably that performance and Pacino in Dog Day were, the two like hard hitting, just like rock my world kind of movies that I saw. But there was tons, and I went to everything. All I did was go to the movies in those days, and even later, when I was like an actor auditioning and between stuff, because I was still living in Queens for a period of time and like commuting. So once you get into the city, you're like, okay, I've got time between appointments or whatever.
During summers, were you coming home from school?
During summers, I was home. Yeah, during summers, I was home.
Were you doing summer stock ever?
Not yet.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't do anything professional until I think one of my classmates in Albany wrote a play, and we went and did a dinner theater thing.
Yeah,
it was like a murder mystery, and I was the host of a speakeasy.
Yeah,
and then I got shot, and so I was like, kind of the lead of the first half of it, and then the murder mystery happened, and I just had to lay dead on the floor in front of these people eating dinner in like Saratoga Springs or somewhere, or Lake George, New York or somewhere. And then they would solve the mystery, and they would have the audience help choose who the murderer was.
Yeah.
And then they go through that whole thing, and I'm like for 45 minutes lying on the ground, and we just kind of cooked this thing up, and didn't have a lot of time to rehearse or whatever, and the major crucial mistake, and this is a good lesson for any actors out there. I fell on my arms, and then I had to lay there for 45 minutes. And at the end they announced all the characters and the actors that played them, and everybody took a bow, and then I was last. And they were like, and Glenn Fleshler as Tim Foley, and I could not get up because my arms were completely asleep. And so it was not my best curtain call.
Oh, man.
That was not smooth.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great. So then, I talked about this with Elliot and Morgan Spector when he was on the show. Mm-hmm. A lot of actors, they really struggle with this. And if you wouldn't mind unpacking it a little bit of your decision and what you think the benefits are, is grad school. It can be a really tricky thing. A lot of actors, like I got a BFA, so I was, pretty sort of satisfied with my training, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And MFAs can be, it's a really hard program. There's like a 1% acceptance rate, at the big three at least. And the other ones, when you finished SUNY, did you know right away that I got to get an MFA?
Well, I had a teacher, an undergrad that was teaching at NYU, so I was hearing stories about it, which piqued my curiosity. But I had another teacher who had worked for a company called the National Shakespeare Company, and that ended up being my first job. So I actually came home.
Is that in D.C.?
No, it was based in New York. It's gone now, but it was like a bus and truck company. It was like the best non-union job you could get at the time in New York, and they were based out of a grungy theater in Hell's Kitchen called the Cubiculo, and I had heard about it from one of my teachers, and then it was like the first picture and resume I sent out.
Yeah.
And it ended up becoming 2 years of work.
Wow. Was that fun times?
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 21, and I got to tour the country doing Shakespeare. I had studied a lot of Shakespeare in college, and I used to actually read it out loud when I was in high school. I didn't even know what I was reading, but my brother had a set of volumes.
So you were comfortable with the iambic?
I wasn't that exposed to it. But I remember opening those books and just reading it out loud and be like, this is fun. By the way, everything I was drawn to at that time was like, I went, like I talked about comedy influences, and I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't really have the musical talent to do, the Broadway stuff that and then when I got to Albany, it became about, classical theater, and I was doing all this kind of serious stuff. But I would bring in scenes that were like, Martin Dysart from Equus, who's like a middle-aged English psychiatrist going through a midlife crisis. Like, what did I know about that at 18? But like, or Salieri in Amadeus, I always was like drawn to those kind of older roles, and then, doing a lot of Shakespeare. And so for 2 years I toured the country, just like, it felt romantic in the way that Shakespeare traveled the country.
Totally. And you must have had all these amazing pieces in your pocket, just, doing...
I did. I developed. I had too many, actually. But I started learning. I mean, I read the whole canon during that time. I played, we would do 2 plays, a comedy and a tragedy. And then I changed roles mid-year because people would leave. So I got to play bigger parts. And then I came back the next year. And then about midway through the second year, I both... wanted more training. I felt like acting-wise, I felt like I wanted like more training.
Yeah.
And then also career-wise, I was like, what's next? Like, how do I move forward?
Yeah.
And I went and did some summer stock. I got to go play Richard III in my early 20s in a summer stock, and that was amazing to just like, it's one of the, probably still to this day, like about the most fun I've had on stage.
Wow.
So I had, really conquered like these huge roles. Little did I know, like, I'm going to be a character actor and play all these little supporting parts and like
no, man,
bits
you're the
and
best
pieces. But like, I got at least early on a chance to like bite off these incredible, meaty things, and that gave me some confidence going forward. As far as going to the decision to go to grad school, I feel like I was coming up at a time where things had changed. The generation before. If all the people I grew up admiring, the Pacinos and De Niro's and all those guys, it was about going to Stella Adler or going to Strasbourg or
studio.
going to Uta Hagen and plunking your money down and, doing it in this kind of gritty New York way. And the next generation, probably starting around Meryl Streep, was the first like icon that I looked at who was like, oh, she went to Yale.
Yeah.
And then the Robin Williamses and Christopher Reeves and
Juilliard
and, that whole thing. And NYU was sort of more newly becoming on that level with those. And then when I was at National Shakespeare Company, one of my directors directed at NYU, and my roommate on the tour, who was like the leading man, had just graduated from NYU.
The MFA program.
Yes.
Wow.
So I was hearing a lot about those directors and that, what that was like. And so that was a lot of sort of what led me there. And I went and did the audition
thing. Did you do the big 3 or just NYU?
I did do the big 3.
And how did it go?
Well, I spent all day at Juilliard
so you got called
tortured.
Back?
Yeah, I got called back, and then I got called back again for a interview, and they were like, wanted me to like, after I finished my monologue, I did it in front of this big panel the second time I came in, and then this guy John Stix, who was one of the main acting teachers there, was like, do you have any pets? I was like, oh, brother. And he was like, yeah, do you have any pets? I said, well, I had a dog, but he died.
Yeah.
He was like, play with your dog.
Oh, my God.
I was like, oh, no. So I felt really stupid. And I'm like playing with my dog. He's like, yeah. Play with your dog and see something terrible happen to him.
What?
See, he wanted me to cry.
Yeah.
That was like the kind of
funny.
the rap about places like that at the time. But it was kind of my worst nightmare of that thing. And I got a little confrontation. I mean, I did what he asked me to do, and I saw something, and and then I just stopped, and then he looked at me and he said, "What happened to him?" And I said, "He got run over by a bicycle." And he said, "Pick him up." So then I have to like pick up, picking up my dead dog.
Jesus. I hope you invoice them for therapy after.
And then I came back and had an interview with him and a guy named Harold Stone. So it was Sticks and Stone.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of the gist of that was that I came in kind of cocky. I had already worked for a couple of years. It was a 4-year program.
So you think that Shakespeare training kind of gave you a real sense of like purpose and
Well, I was just a cocky kid because I'd done some work, but also I think they wanted to know, was I going to stick around? Because it's 4 years there.
Right, that's true.
They had some kids who were 17 coming in.
Yeah, because they mix MFA and undergrad.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was about that. They were asking me very strange questions, like, do you have any friends? And stuff like that. It was all very, very odd. So that did not work out. And at Yale, it was just like, take the train up. And there was a guy named Earl Gister, who was the chair then, and nobody told me that he had a voice box.
Wow.
And so, there was like very nice people outside the monitors, but nobody. And then after my audition, I heard them telling somebody like, he has a voice box, or just, But I didn't know. And I was like, why didn't anyone tell me? Because sure enough, I go in and I finish my monologue and then I hear like, when were you with the National Shakespeare Company? You know, and I'm just like, he brings me over to sit down and talk to him. And I'm just like trying not to look at his throat the whole time because he's holding up this thing to his throat.
Wow.
And I'm just like, it totally like did a number on me, you know. Anyway, so that didn't work out. And NYU was like the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It was like, you know, and by that time, like I said, that was the place where I had talked to a lot of people about.
Yeah.
It seemed to be the up and coming place, and it had my kind of vibe. And they were not like holding you at a distance. They were like, we're going to do 3 classes. You're going to talk to students. You're going to talk to Ron Van Loo, who is then the chair of the program.
Yeah.
And sit down. You know, they were like, you have to get to know us as much as we get to know you.
We wanted
it wasn't
to be
like a prohibitive sort of feeling. And it was surreal. It was surreal. It was really my dream at that point. And I was so hungry, and I think they felt that.
Yeah.
And I walked in. I did my monologues for Ron the first time. And he asked me for more material. And I remember listing, he's like, what else do you have? And I listed off like 20 Shakespeare monologues because I had learned, like, I was just doing this stuff in the shower at that point. And he said, anything contemporary. And I was like, oh. So I rattled off a few things, and none of them were like tried and true monologues. There was like something I'd been in a play called Key Exchange in college. And there was like something that I'd circled in the book Catch-22 as like a short monologue, because it could be like a 1-minute monologue. And I'd never done it. And there were a couple other things that I was just pulling out of my ass, basically. And he was like, yeah, do the Key Exchange and the Catch-22. And then he said, do you want some time to go out and prepare? And I didn't know these monologues. I hadn't used them. You know, one I had just done in a play several years before.
Yeah.
And one I never did.
Yeah.
And I stupidly just said no. I just was like, no, I'm here. I'm doing that. I was just like so determined to like be at that school. And so I did, you know, I just pulled it out. And then he talked to me a little bit. And then he was like, I want you to come to the callback.
Wow.
And a lot of people were waiting for phone calls at home and all of that stuff, or waiting for a letter. I think Juilliard sent a letter or something. So the fact that he told me right then was kind of incredible.
Yeah.
So I came to the callback for he and Zelda Fitchandler, who was the artistic director at the time, who really shaped what that program became. She's the one who really put it on the national map. And you know, did monologues again, and then we did all the classes. You know, it was a whole weekend of stuff. And I remember coming back in the second day, and I was coming from Queens, so I had to leave really early. So I got there really early. I always had to leave like so much time on the other end. And I walked in, and the place is empty, and Ron's in his office. And he looks at me, and he says, Glenn, can you come in here? And for some reason, this is just, again, the duality of the actor, I stood up, and in the 7 steps from the little chair in the waiting area into his office, I had convinced myself that he was going to tell me to go home.
Oh, no.
I was just positive.
Yeah.
It wasn't even like a self-conscious thing. I was like, oh, he's going to tell me I don't need to be here. I don't, you know, it's just like fear coming to the surface. And then I sat down in the chair, and this is like before the second day of the callbacks. You know, we're going to do all these classes or sit down and talk to people or whatever. And he said, Zelda and I would like to invite you into the program.
Oh, my God.
And then everything else he said after that, you know, just kind of went into a haze. He was like, you know, about getting my financial aid in order and, you know, all of this stuff. And please don't tell anyone today, you know. And I went numb. I went completely numb. And I said, okay. And I stood up, and he just kind of gave me the nod, like, you know, meeting over. Yeah. And I stood up, and I walked to the door. And in a couple steps to the door, I was like, well, you have to say something, like, be gracious, you know. So I stopped, and I turned around. I literally just like this went, I'm very excited. You know, I was like, I couldn't manifest the emotion. You know, I was like so
shell shocked.
Yeah. So it was an amazing way to start that whole journey.
And so it was a beautiful 3 years, I imagine.
Oh, well, it was a roller coaster of, you know, it was such a roller coaster. You know, again, I came in, you know, with a little chip on my shoulder, I think, but I really wanted to be embraced. And I was used to like teachers being mentors. And, you know, that was not the case there. You know, there was a lot of resistance to the fact that I had worked before. There was the whole breaking you down process. Plus, your first year, you're doing so much breathing.
Yeah.
You're just like doing a lot of deep breathing. The whole class is like massaging each other all the time. You're stretching out and you're breathing. So you're letting go of all this stuff, and you're dealing with emotional material all the time. You're doing a lot of improv. And so the highs and lows were so extreme. Like I remember having like the greatest laughs of my life in those rooms, and also like being an emotional wreck. And also thinking like the littlest exercise was like the greatest theater I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you start to understand theater in a different way when you start breaking it down. And there were certain fantastic teachers there. And, again, we weren't doing production yet really. So it was a lot of improv and a lot of exercises and yeah, just like opening up the world, like seeing the drama in one sentence, and really there's a whole story within that.
Yeah.
And, it was very trippy. But I always had mixed feelings about it, and particularly because of the spiraling debt that I went into.
6 figures right here. Thank you, NYU.
Yes. So, and I had no way to, I remember, they were like, how are you going to pay for it? And I was like, I'll figure out a way, again, wrong answer. I had a classmate who they had asked her, like, how are you going to pay for it? And she said, I can't. And then she ended up with a free ride. And there were a couple of people, in my class that had a free ride. They had to do some work for it. I did a little work study thing. I would try to do little jobs, answer phones, and whatever. I worked as a security guard a little bit in one of the NYU buildings, but none of it really made a dent.
Yeah.
So it was really worth it. And ultimately, I was always somebody that just had to be completely tunnel visioned on acting.
Totally.
There's a lot of people. I did have struggle. I had years and years and years of struggle, but I never had that like.
Were your parents supportive? Once you got in this program,
my parents helped me. I don't know that they. And in fact, I came home from that day. I remember walking through Washington Square Park. I just, I loved the Village at that time. It was like where I wanted to be. I ended up living there for the next several years. Wow. But when I was still at my parents' house, after like having been on the road for a couple of years and not being able to afford anything.
Yeah.
I walked home and I was like, I got into NYU. And my dad was like, how are you going to pay for it? And, I blathered something about acting. But deep in my heart, I was like, I want to pay for it by acting, and that was always the thing. And that was, they'd bring people in to talk to us for our career class. And they'd say, you got to do this and get your affairs in order and, this kind of job and that kind of job and make money doing that. And I always thought, like, I'm going to do it by acting. And, of course, I knew everyone was telling me it's completely unrealistic. In fact, we had an actor come in named Vincent Scavelli. You know who that character actor is?
Yeah.
Incredible face. And he was in all the Milos Forman movies. And he had gone to NYU with Ron Van Loo in the 70s. And he came and spoke to our class one day, just our class, informally in a little classroom. We were sitting around on the floor. And he was like, the truth is, if you want to make money, you have to go to L.A.
Yeah.
And that was always like, I was always bucking up against that, and then it haunted me for years because I stayed in New York. And I couldn't make money, but I was like, I'm determined to do it. Yeah. And now I'm happy to say to all the actors out there that I am completely debt free, and it was 100% paid for by acting.
Amazing.
But it took a very long time.
Well, you manifested it with your talent and your hard work.
I guess I did, and I guess that's what all actors have to do. I mean, you just dive into that dream and just dream it harder and harder. People are always like, what's the secret? What's the how do you do it? How do you stick it out? And really it's just by doing it, by believing in it and doing it. And, the doubts come, and we know those demons, and they come and they come and they come, but you have to bat them away. It took me many, many years to realize that was true. Yeah. Many, many years. So,
And when you graduated, were you kind of doing the co-star, guest star, Broadway auditions?
Not at all. I mean, I came out, I thought I was the best actor there. I came out, I didn't have an agent.
Wow. Out of the
I
showcase?
Got completely slapped in the face.
No way.
And, I was cast aside completely. I went and worked. The best thing I did was the first summer when everyone was like, off with their fancy agents, trying to be on the next Friends, I went to the Berkshires and did 3 plays at the Berkshire Theater Festival with one of my classmates, a guy and 2 girls from Juilliard. We'd all just graduated. Wow. We lived in a house together. We did 3 plays. We played volleyball all summer and like swam in the lake and went to the bar and played pool at night and cranked out these plays and just had a blast.
Yeah. And,
it was really like the thing that you're supposed to be doing, the love of the craft, like playing and I got to transform it to different people like I like to do. And, it's such a beautiful environment.
Yeah.
And then there were actors on the main stage who were like a little bit beyond me in the career, that I could talk to and look up to.
Yeah, and for advice. And
I thought they were making a lot of money because they were making like 400 something a week.
Wow.
Like, but you guys are making money. I was working for $100 a week. But it was amazing. And actually, some of those actors, well, the actresses I was working with who'd come out of Juilliard had an agent from ICM. And I was like, that I couldn't even conceive of. I just wanted like any agent, you know.
Totally. Just someone to get me in rooms.
And he came to the shows and he saw me perform and I, you know, they said, oh, we'll put in a word for you. And then they were like, oh yeah, he wants to meet you. And I went and met this like pretty powerful agent in New York. And I sat with him and he's telling me, you know, like, yeah, you might want to do some theater. So I'll get you a meeting at, you know, Manhattan Theater Club and
Nancy Piccioni,
and I'll get you a meeting with, you know, Howard Fuhr and he's naming like the biggest casting directors in the country that are way out of my league, I'm thinking. And he's like, yeah, you'll meet them, you know, for movies and blah 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 and all this stuff he's promising me. And I'm like, this is incredible, I made it. And then for the next several months, and he's like, I'm going away on vacation, so call me in a couple of weeks. And then I would call, and his young assistant would be like, oh yeah, what number are you at?
Yeah.
Okay, he'll call you back. And I got we had the same conversation, and I try to like leave enough time to not be like annoying.
Yeah.
But then call back like, hey, Paul said to call him, and never got on the phone with the guy again.
No
so that was
way.
like another rude lesson in show business.
Oh my God.
Like, people will say one thing to your face.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Oh God, this business.
So yeah, I went through a lot of that. I went through one thing before I went to grad school where like I found in the newspaper and then I like paid the guy money. I remember giving him my credit card. I was like never in debt before in my life. It was like my first credit card, and he's like charging me $350 to manage me supposedly, and they're getting like these like photocopies of the breakdowns, and they're like, maybe you could go in for one of these things. I mean, it never led to anything. You know, I was just such a sucker because I was just so hungry.
We all are because we want it so bad.
Yeah. So, you know, I have a real, you know, it's made me very, that's like probably the thing that gets me more upset than anything else is like seeing actors taken advantage of. So I've become, as I've, you know, could not give a shit as much later in my career, become very, you know, protective of those kind of things. And also you're able to smell it coming and, you know, say no to things as you move on. But, you know, because I know that feeling of just being that hungry.
Yeah.
And that there are so many people who just prey on you. It's really, it's sick.
And then, you know, going back to bringing it full circle, you know, I discovered you in Spring Awakening, which became the smash hit. What was it like doing that?
Well, that was kind of the beginning of the change in my life. I had, you know, a good 10 years before that where I was working. I did off-Broadway. I did regional theater. I got my first film, and then I couldn't get another film audition for a year.
Wow.
I did a Miramax film, and I mean, you know, I started with, I always pretty much until the last few years had pretty small agents, but this first office was very small and, you know, they were doing their best, but it was like, I don't know how I'm going to get to where I want to get to.
Totally.
But my plan was just to keep working and try to play as many different things. At that point, I was transitioning from young leading man into, you know, this character creature. People didn't quite know what to do with me. How to
position you.
And so what I ended up doing was playing a lot of like, you're going to play, you know, 5 parts in this show. Or you're going to play, you know, 3 parts in this. You're going to play 9 parts in that. So it was a lot of putting on wigs and off wigs and, you know, fat suits and, you know, mustaches and trying to change my body posture, you know, but it made use of my NYU training. We did a lot of mask work, and, you know, I grew up doing impressions, so I could use all of those skills. And I liked that, but it was really like feeling like I had to make a lot out of a little. I feel like I've always had to do that, you know, since I got to play those really great leading man parts. After that, it was like, oh, well, I'm going to have to find the artistry in this little tiny thing that they've given me, or in the difference between these characters and like the transformation, because I always believe that acting is magic. You know, it should feel like magic. It should feel like, how did they do that? You know, I had one director, this great director, Robert Woodruff, who directed us in an incredible show called The Devils at NYU, and he had so many fantastic things he said, but one of the things he was looking for was like, I want to show the audience something that they can't do themselves. Wow. So in his case, it manifested a lot of physical stuff. Yeah. But I think that, you know, it's there's so many ways to do that, whether it's through your vulnerability or through the power of transformation, or, you know, through your emotional life and your experience. But it's just like looking for that moment where you let go and something happens that you couldn't have predicted, you know. And that's how I felt watching the people that I admired. It was like, how are they doing that? You know? So anyway, I forgot where we started.
Well, no, totally. We talked about Spring Awakening.
Spring Awakening. Yeah. Well, Spring Awakening was 9 German Lutheran men from 1861 in one suit. That was the challenge. And it basically relied on my classical training.
Yeah.
Playing all the Shakespearean fathers that I'd been since I was 21 years old.
I mean, it's been so long since I saw that show.
Yeah.
Were you singing in that as well?
I had to sing a little bit, but not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have to sing for the audition. The director, Michael Mayer, had directed 3 shows at NYU when I was there. He was just kind of busting out on the scene, and including an incredible production of Perestroika, the second half of Angels in America, before it got to Broadway. He did it at NYU.
Wow.
With our third-year class when I was a first year, and that was completely transformative. In fact, that whole experience of Angels going to Broadway, Tony Kushner having come from NYU, he came and spoke to us. They worked on the second part there. They had done the first part at Juilliard in workshop, and then the second part at NYU. So that was really you know, to feel like I'm training as an actor. I think the combination of that and what was happening in independent film, like Tarantino was just exploding,
right? And
that whole scene,
and the television kind of like you did Boardwalk Empire, and that's kind of what started the you know.
Well, it happened before. You know, I was a little late to that party. But let's get back to Spring Awakening. So I had met Michael Mayer, but he didn't direct me. I was like a house manager for one of his shows. That was like my crew assignment. He directed Othello with the second-year class when I was a first year, and I was the house manager. So we knew each other. I think I'd maybe auditioned for him once in the early years, and then he became this huge Broadway director, and I hadn't seen him in years and years, but he oddly remembered me. I was now a completely different type, different body type. You know, my hair had gone, and I was a different guy. And he was sitting with Tom Hulse, the actor who is now a producer and produces a lot of Broadway, and they were creating that show, and they needed someone to replace Stephen Spinella, who had originated The Adult Men, was the name of the role, the father and teacher and doctor, and you know, to all the kids in that show. And they thought I was like some Bruegel painting or something, and so they cast me to understudy him, and I could not get arrested on Broadway. It was one of those things in my mind. You get these sort of memes in your brain that like, well, this has never happened, so it's never going to happen. Yeah. In fact, I went to the West End and worked with Maggie Smith in an Edward Albee play before I got to Broadway.
Wow.
You know, I was like,
did the reverse commute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was like a big, basically it started in 2006. I started to get like, I had hit like a low point in my career. I was really not having a lot of hope at the time. My personal life had fallen apart. And then like something changed. Something changed in the atmosphere. And part of it was me flicking a switch that like, I don't have to be miserable. I was like way in debt. I had no answers. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was struggling to survive.
You're narrating my thoughts right now.
Yeah, well, I know it. We all go through it. You have to go through it. But and I'm an extreme case of it. And then, I don't know, something started to change. I remember getting offered a Kenny Lonergan movie out of nowhere without an audition because of a wonderful casting director, Doug Abel.
Oh, nice.
And I did that, which unfortunately took then like 6 years to
come out.
Yeah. It went through all these problems. As many of the indie films I did in those days, it was cool to be in indie films at the time. And, we had what we had in New York. We didn't have a ton of work in New York, but you had some cool, gritty films. But then like they all would go through like years of either development or, in editing or problems. There was all kinds of things like they were hard to... so I had that several times, but definitely with that one. Anyway, and then I had a year in 2006 where I went from play to play to play to play to play, and I had for the first time being in anything that anyone cared about in New York. I was in a play called Stuff Happens by David Hare, which was like a 16-person ensemble, and it was all about George Bush and Tony Blair and the march to war in Iraq and all the decisions. And it was like all these behind-the-scenes conversations, and David had done like thousands of books worth of research and thousands of interviews. I mean, it was like an incredible piece. Yeah. And Dan Sullivan directed it in a brilliant way, and he decided to make it like alley seating, and just have us all sitting on stage the whole time, no desks, no microphones coming on and off for the press conferences, just like little pools of light. And it was really, we were all we had, really. Yeah. Little sound cues here and there, but mostly it was just the actors, and we had to really support each other and be there. And you had to think these very complicated thoughts as playing these politicians. Totally. And again, I'm playing multiple roles. Yeah. I'm George Tenet, the head of the CIA, but then I'm Saddam Hussein. I had to learn to speak Arabic, and
phonetically.
I guess somebody in the cast taught me, and all this, and it became a hit, and it extended and extended and extended, And I was working with these like actors who were like me. They were like character actors in New York, grinding away, but they, had been around longer. And, so I got to kind of be in a great New Yorkie ensemble at the Public. And that was big. And the day after it closed, I went into rehearsal with Meryl Streep for Mother Courage in Central Park. And that was the first time I'm working with
a hero.
A superstar.
And how did that feel finally in that moment?
It
Did
was
it all feel worth it?
It was, well, I remember even talking with Meryl one day. We ran into each other in like a little bakery. Yeah. She was like hiding under a hat, and then she like lifted her face up and put it in my face, like, I'm here. And I was like, oh, hello. And we walked to the park together. And I remember just complaining. It's so embarrassing now to think, because I was like still in that like actor complaining mode where I was like, oh, but it's not happening. And she's like, what are you talking about? You're doing great. And I was just like, no, but I want to be like you, Meryl. But the experience was actually, another confidence, inspiring experience. And she was just, it's one of those rare times where you meet a hero and they exceed your expectations, let alone meet it. I mean, and we all would sit in the dressing room and hear her on stage. Just and somebody, it was just a bunch of guys in this dressing room, and one of us would hear something on the monitor and just go, I fucking love her. We would just hear over and over, and we just all rallied around her, and she was a great leader. And I was coaching a lot of actors at the time, and kind of still trying to figure out like what acting is, and, and she helped me distill it down, because I was like, I want to study this greatest actress of, in the world, maybe ever, and what is it that makes her tick, and what is it, and ultimately I boiled it down to like the fact that she was totally in her script, like fully preparing, absorbing
mastery
the
of the
script.
text.
She was in every prop choice, every costume choice, sometimes too much into what you were doing, like, this guy, he's a coward, I'd be like, hey, easy. And then combine that with the ability to be completely present in the moment.
Yeah.
And, when you're on stage in Central Park and there's planes overhead and there's like animals scurrying across and there's an audience, a New York audience that got in for free.
Yeah.
And there's weather. What better way to be than to be able to take all of that environment and use it? And she did that in an incredible way. And I would see her stamping her feet on the stage in the middle of a monologue, and I knew that she wasn't making a choice. She was trying to shake herself out of any patterns or, and I totally related to that at that time. I was always looking for how to be alive every show, And, she would chase me around the stage with a knife. At one point, we were like adversaries, and I'd have to like fake her out. She'd be like, "You went upstage of the wagon tonight." I'd be like, "You were gonna kill me," like, because she would really come after me. So anyway, I have 1,000 stories from that, but just it was an amazing time. And then right after that closed, we remounted Stuff Happens in the Park for one day. So on our Mother Courage set, actually, we did sort of a reading, but we all kind of knew it. And they wanted to give it away free to the city of New York, because everyone was so pissed about what was happening in the war. And that was the night that, I remember when we did the play at the Public, I thought, like, is this going to be like people going to scream and like be freaked out? Because there was such raw emotion about what was happening in the country at that time, much like now, unfortunately. Yeah. And that night, and it was mostly tame, except one night when we were leaving the stage as the lights were dimming, this guy yelled out, "Somebody tell me this is fiction." Remember that. But other than that, the whole run was pretty peaceful. Wow. But then we did it in the park, and there were like people handing out political flyers, and there were people booing, Cheney and Rumsfeld, and there were, and then David Hare got up on the stage and got into like heated arguments with people. Wow. And it was great. He was so happy. Like, I'd never seen him like really beaming with happiness until that night. It was like he got what he wanted out of it. And I remember seeing him, and he was like, congratulated me, great job. And I said, thanks, David. I'm glad you're happy. And he looked at me and he just smiled this big smile and said, "Oh, I'm very happy."
Oh, man.
And I was like, all right,
I love
you're
it,
doing
man.
something. And then I went and did another play in Chicago, and so it was like a year where it was like, this is how I drew it up. I'm going from play to play to play.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I started dating a woman who turned out to be my wife.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
I was like, I don't know, I'm like going from town to town. This long distance thing has not worked out for me in the past. And I said, maybe I need to stay around New York more. And, of course, agents were always telling you, like, well, if you were in New York,
I could get you on.
But then, of course, they're sending me off to do these plays in, Connecticut and wherever.
Of course.
And so I the next job I got was to go work with Maggie Smith in London, because where do you go after Meryl Streep? It's like you got to go to London and work with a dame. So I couldn't say no to that. So I was like, should I have to leave again, for 5 months? But that was an amazing experience. And
when I had Kathleen Turner on the show, she told a great story about Maggie, how she recently just went to London to see her, and she did like a 90-page one-woman show monologue, and and she asked her why she did it, and she's like, just so I could still do it,
Yeah, she's a force of nature.
Was that a fun time over there?
It was. It was very complicated, and it was very, Maggie's complicated. Edward Albee, rest in peace, was complicated guy, and it was a play that had run on Broadway in 1980 for about 12 performances and closed. Wow. So here we got a few months out of it. Maggie was like, would get despondent if a few seats were empty, because she was used to, like, if her name was above the title, totally, the place was packed. And so I had to say, like, we're getting 5 months out of this thing, So yeah, it was a great experience. And 5 Americans went over, some of my friends, and then we got to go to Paris after and hang out, and my now wife was flying back and forth to come see me, and it was a heady time, and it gave me another boost of, like, I can get a job in the West End. Like, that rarely happens. They never take Americans over there, so this was a rare thing, I think, because Albee wanted it to be authentic. And a testament to your immense talent. Well, thank you. Nobody knew who the hell I was at that point, but to get the affirmation from people like that, that does help. And then when I came back, I remember getting offered some regional stuff, and I was like, okay, but get me out of it. Yeah. And that's when Spring Awakening came. And that did change my life. That was another one of those. Yeah, I mean, game changers. That was the Hamilton of its time. It was a big deal, but I came into it late. They were already established, and here's a bunch of kids that are, from 16 or 15 to 24. Yeah. I'm already well into my 30s. And it's my Broadway debut, just like it's theirs, except they think they're hot shit. They're in a hit show. I didn't make this show happen. Yeah. I started understudying. Then I ended up taking over the role. My first night on Broadway, the play came to a complete halt because, like, a cue was missed, and the show stopped, and this platform ran over Leah Michelle's foot, and she ran off stage crying and screaming. We're all stuck there on stage. Oh my God. Slowly, like, walk off, and they get it fixed and whatever. And I ended up doing that play for a year and a half. I'd never done anything more than 5 months before. The first thing I saw you in, and first thing a lot of people saw me in, and so the challenge of not only creating that, I had to kind of find it in front of an audience. And Stephen Spinella, who had preceded me, had told me that. Like, it took us months to kind of figure these characters out, because you have these little snippets, and you have to create a whole world, And, the best part was just, like, we sat on the stage with some audience that was on the stage, and we would come in and out from sitting in these seats on the stage, and I was right by the drummer. I was right by that band, and hearing that rock music. It's as close as I'll come to being in a rock concert. Totally, and occasionally we'd have a night where, it was somebody's last night or something, and because we developed these passionate fans that would come again and again, that would really be like a rock concert. And I had, like, the line leading into the song, or the line coming out of the applause break or whatever. And that was, like, a really thrilling feeling. I'm like, I'm never going to really have this again. And that started, from being well into my 30s and never being able to get arrested on Broadway, I ended up doing 6 Broadway shows in 5 years. Yeah, you did that. Salesman, right? That was the last one. Wow, okay. I went right the day I did twice. I did 2 at a time. So again, I was like, this is how I drew it up. This is how it's supposed to be. I'm like rehearsing one show and performing in another. The downside was that then I was totally burned out. I'm sure. I had, like, stage fright, and I was like, my body was breaking down, because I was so determined to keep the show alive and never be bored, that I was, like, my mind was playing tricks on me. Yeah. And it's very, very underrated thing to do, to be able to do these long runs. And there are some people, I have some friends who still do that, who are, like, in shows for years, and it's very, very Elliot told me he did War Horse for 2 years. You know? Yeah. So, but it was such a, it was a dream, because I'd gone to Broadway, and the fact that my first 2 were musicals, which I thought I'd never sniff a Broadway musical. Yeah. Then I started getting nothing but musicals, which was very weird, because I sing okay, but I'm not a Broadway singer, and certainly not a dancer. And, well, it's because you were so incredible in that role. I thought, what's happening now? Yeah. Like, I've taken this weird turn, and then I had to start pivoting away from that. And also, I didn't want to be on stage, so I ended up understudying Christopher Walken in a play. The Martin McDonough one? Yes, Behanding in Spokane, so that I didn't have to be on stage, which actually turned into a fantastic experience. And it was an hour and a half long play, which is brilliant for Broadway. Of course. I was home by, like, 9:30. Wow. It was great. And it was a fun cast, and And then I did worked my way back. Like I did an ensemble part with Pacino in Merchant of Venice, another hero, and then I did a couple scenes in Arcadia in a revival, and then Death of a Salesman happened, and that was another kind of bridge because I became very close with Mike Nichols, who was a hero. I mentioned Silkwood before, and I did the auditions with him. I was a reader for him, and I ended up becoming like his right-hand man. I would finish his sentences. He'd say, "Who's my friend?" I'd say, "Bruno Kirby." He would just, I don't know how it happened, but we started developing this.
Yeah.
And I had a fun scene as the waiter in the show with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and
rest in peace.
And then, yes, indeed, and I ended up covering Willie Loman, which was like, I really enjoyed that part more. Not that I wanted to do it. I just liked working on it. I would go home. At some point, I said to the stage manager, okay, I've watched Phil, and we did a workshop. Scott Rudin paid for a 3-week workshop. You never get that on an established play. And so the rest of the cast wasn't there yet, so I was reading all the other parts.
Yeah.
And then I ended up with this part and covering Phil, and I just, I didn't expect to go on.
Yeah.
But I read Miller's biography, and I studied it, and it sort of reminded me of my parents' time in New York. I always loved hearing those stories about old New York, and I'm very different from Phil. Well, we have some similarities. We did go up for a lot of the same parts early on.
Yeah.
He got them all. but I felt like I had my own way into it, and I learned a lot from what he did and from what Mike talked about. But I always felt like, there's something else that I know about this from being a New Yorker and a Jew. And weirdly, people would say, well, are you going to go on? I was like, probably not. Oh, maybe you'll play it someday. I was like, maybe when I'm 80 or something, And about 4 months later, and my son was born during that show. So it's also like a play about fathers and sons and this kind of broken love story. And I got to be around Phil and Bill Camp and all these actors who were parents at different stages, but having an artistic life. And that was great for me to see. And they were all, Scott Rudin and Mike and Phil and everybody were very supportive when I had my kid. It was a 2-show day. I got to miss 2 shows, have a kid, come back to the show, and they had raised all this money for us for diapers and stuff, and they were just, they couldn't have been better. And in fact, my son's first time out of leaving the home basically was we took him on the subway to go visit the Death of a Salesman and have brunch with the cast. And that was kind of the end of, felt like I was coming to the end of my theater career. I was already on Boardwalk Empire by that time. And I was looking to do more film and television.
So was there a tactical moment where you were you told your agents, guys, I've done a lot of this now, I need to pivot?
It sort of happened gradually because part of being in New York, the whole Broadway thing was so significant to me, because it was the first time I made a paycheck where I thought it wasn't going to get me out of debt, but I thought I can live for the next year. Yeah. And I also know where I'm going to be. Yeah. And, I see the same faces, everything, that sort of normalcy that most people have in their jobs that they get very bored of. I was like, I've never had this. Yeah. I've been going from town to town, for 2 months, being with a new family, and then leaving, and that wander thing. And so it was a very heady time, but also, it allowed me to have a relationship with my wife and see us be in the same place. And it also allowed me to get that consistency on film and television auditioning that I never had before, because it was always here and there, maybe I'll get a Law and Order or I get an indie film and then not see another audition for a long time. And so now and also New York was changing, because now what you talked about, the peak TV boom was just beginning, and New York was getting more work. HBO was starting to do more stuff.
They had the
here.
incentive program
and so it was just changing. And then, of course, I was going through my own demons of being on stage. And I was having a kid. So, I felt like, maybe a transition would happen. But the crazy thing was that the show closed. We had the kid. A few weeks later, the show closed. And about 4 months later, I got a phone call from the Alley Theater in Houston saying, we're doing Death of a Salesman. And our Willie Loman had a coronary. And the first preview is tomorrow night. Can you come and play Willie Loman?
Oh, my God.
Which is nothing I was looking for or expecting. But I knew I had sort of been brewing all these ideas. And my wife was like, you got to go. Yeah. Luckily, the first words out of my mouth were, I have a 4-month-old. They were like, oh, we'll do this and we'll do that. And, they made it very workable for me. And I held them off for a few days. I got the kid who had covered the boys, Biff and Happy, in the show. And I I needed somebody who really knew the play.
Yeah.
So I took him, like, plied him with food and drink. We went from, like, restaurant to bar in Brooklyn, and while he ran the script with me, because I was like, I have to see if this is in my head from 4 months ago, you know. And then I came down on the Monday, and we staged it in 4 days, and I played Willie Loman for a month and just kind of exercised demons, you know. And then I was like, kind of done, you know. I heard Patty Clarkson talk about this on a podcast recently, where she had talked about playing Blanche Dubois and then sort of exercising something and walking away from the theater. So that sort of happened where I'd get the same character parts, perfectly good jobs would come out, and I would just sort of laugh. I'd be like, I can't possibly do that now. It was just like something had happened. So I did do one more play that I got talked into, which was fun. I did King Lear in the Park about 4 or 5 years ago. With John Lithgow, and that was a very fun time. But that's it. I haven't done another play since. And once in a while, one will come by. But I'm like, until it's like the thing that makes me, you know, my manager will always say, like, we're going to find the thing that makes you come back. I'm like, okay, it's not coming close so far. So anyway.
That's amazing. And then I'm curious because, like, you've done so much work with HBO. You know, you did True Detective, you did Barry, you did Boardwalk Empire. Was that serendipitous? Like, you just kind of became a company actor for them? Or?
It's so funny that people have that perspective, because none of it seems to have anything. I've never been able to find a thread. There's never been the same casting director twice.
Wow.
There's never been the same director twice. There's never been the same executives in the room.
Wow.
But they have turned up at every little milestone of my television career, because my first TV show ever was Sex and the City.
No way.
I think that's the first.
So you've been on almost every HBO show.
One of the first TV auditions I did, you know, and it was a one-off thing, but it was really fun, and people always wanted to talk to me about it because that show became a phenomenon. It hadn't aired yet when we made it, so I had no idea, and I've still never really seen that show. But
me either.
But you know, people went crazy for it, and then. I was in the pilot for Bored to Death. That was the first pilot I ever did, although I wasn't a recurring or anything. But I was around it a little bit because they kept doing table reads over and over because they were trying to get the right tone because it had this noirish thing. But, you know, you wanted it to be funny. And Alan Taylor directed that, who I had admired from his work on The Sopranos.
Yeah.
And, so it was cool for me to just be around that. And then Boardwalk was the first real part that anyone ever recognized me for. So that was a big thing.
George Remus, an iconic character.
Well, you know, it was really 9 episodes. I didn't, you know, always have that much to do, but I remember like going in the first time and just kind of, it was the first time I'd ever been on a set of a television show or a movie where I felt like I took control in some way. I remember, and I was intimidated because when I was doing that play with Maggie Smith in London, I was with an actress named Catherine McCormack, terrific actress, and she, we were both, you know, kind of would love to talk about film. Yeah. And so she was like, oh, there's a new Shane Meadows film. And I didn't know his work, you know. She's like, do you want to go, you know, before the show tomorrow to a matinee? So I was like, okay. And we went to go see this movie called This Is England. I don't know if you know that movie.
I don't know.
Well,
I'm embarrassed to say it.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And there's it's kids. It's like a 13-year-old boy who becomes a skinhead. And this whole gang around him. And the kid is amazing, and all the supporting characters are amazing. But, you know, like a third of the way through the movie, this actor comes into the movie and just completely hijacks the whole thing. And he's like so intense and kind of evil, but like you feel for him. Yeah. And I was doing this sort of minor bad guy in this Albee play at night. And I remember like being so blown away by him and then going to the theater that night and being like so inspired to be more, you know, make more out of what I was doing. And that actor turned out to be Stephen Graham, who played Capone on Boardwalk Empire.
Stephen.
So my first day was going to be opposite Stephen Graham, you know, in the first George Remus scene where I keep saying my name over and he doesn't know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, he's George Remus. You know? And he couldn't have been sweeter, you know, so he dispelled my worries right away because he was so sweet. You know, and of course then I was like, when I saw him as Capone, I was like, oh, that's what makes him so special. It's like he's bringing this vulnerability to Capone. I thought he was going to be really intimidating, you know, and but he brought this softness to it, you know. And but I just remember like telling the director, like, can you have a background come through here at this point? And I don't know, there was just like a new sense of ownership. It was the first time. I still didn't know what I was doing on camera, but I was experimenting in a new way. I don't even know where that came from. I never would have thought that
for a second. I mean,
And it was also like walking into this world, and not only Scorsese behind the the project, but all those cool
Tim
New York
Van Patten.
actors. A few of them I'd known. Like I'd known Michael Stuhlbarg. We were kind of contemporaries and came out of school around the same time. And a few of the people, but it just seemed like these cool, edgy New York actors, and I was getting a little bit indoctrinated into the on-camera world. But I really didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. And it got some extra press because Ken Burns was doing a Prohibition documentary at the time, and he focused on George Remus. So there were newspaper articles about me now playing this part on HBO, and I was like, I don't really, unfortunately, I dove into the background of George Remus, which is a crazier real life story than fiction could ever live up to.
Yeah,
it's like an incredible life. And it became on the show a little bit of a joke because, I remember that first time sitting at a table reading, once my character came back and I'm with, all of the gangster guys and I'm, trying to tell them this and that.
Yeah.
And then at the end I had the line, Remus is finished. And I remember Scorsese bursting out laughing and everybody at the table laughing. And then I was doomed from that point because then it was just like me saying my name over and over, George Remus, George Remus. Even Buscemi at some point was like, we're still doing this, So, it didn't go into the depths of like what that guy's life was and whatever. It became more of a comic relief. But I tried to like play against it a little bit with some gravitas of like he really thought he was something. In fact, one of the things I was really thinking about when I played that part was Trump, who wasn't president at the time. He was just Trump, but he was putting his name on everything. And so I thought about it, partially like a lawyer, which he had been, and partially like a businessman.
Yeah,
that's kind of
capitalist.
branding, you know. So to make sense of like, why am I saying Remus so much,
And then how was True Detective? Was that fun working with McConaughey
True
and
Detective
Woody and
was
Nick?
another step, again, there's HBO in a moment when it's really the role that kind of made me known around the world.
The
and
Yellow
like,
King.
and I remember like for my wife and I always talk about like that first week or so after that came out where people were just like following me.
I'm
and,
sure
like,
you could.
It was like a little weird, and people were taking pictures and most people were nice, but we were just feeling this new sense of like, oh, we're being looked at wherever we go. Every time we walked into a restaurant or whatever. That was quite a phenomenon. I've been lucky with a lot of the things I've done that they've happened. That was like a moment where like, I forget what it ended in the fall, but something on HBO. And then it was before like Game of Thrones had come back. And it was like this pocket where like everyone was just watching True Detective. You know what I mean? And I've had a few experiences like that where the timing was right, where it was just like, wow, this is like the thing right now.
It was the biggest thing in the world.
And that one, is one of those, sometimes you have no idea. That was one of those, he had written that whole thing before it was made. And when I read it, I was like, I read them all out of order. I kept saying, can you send me like 2 and 6? Like they were sending them in like a funny order. So I read it all out of order first, and then I read I like binge read it like in a weekend. And I was like, oh, this is special. This is going to be special. I hadn't seen something quite like this before. And, the fact that I was the reveal of the whole thing, I carried that around. It was like 2 years before the thing came out, from the time I met Carrie and Nick to the time it came out. So I was like this walking spoiler alert for like 2 years. So it was a very strange, heady experience. And Woody and Matthew were great. It wasn't like a fun job. Some people are always like, is it fun? And some jobs are fun, and some are like you kind of go to the place, and you're just like sitting with that. So I remember like we had some emails back and forth, Nick and Carrie Fukunaga and I, about who this guy was going to be, and I was doing a lot of research, but I was mostly alone with it, with my like little baby at home, and this tortured mindset. And then I'd show up to set, and Carrie would be like, "Nah, I don't want to do that." And he'd be like, "Is that the voice you're going to use?" And I'd be like, oh, "Come on," And so it evolved, in a very interesting way. But mostly, it was 4 to 6 hours of makeup. So I was like 2:30 a.m. calls, and me and my makeup artist, and just kind of staying in a kind of a dark place. And Nick had said, the basic thing is like your mind is like a hall of mirrors. So I was like just trying to like jump from one persona to another. And it's funny that became a breakout role, because again, here's a part where he's got to be a lot of different people, because he's grown up watching stuff on TV and trying to figure out how to talk. And so he's like taking on accents, and he's a bit of a chameleon, which is what I've always strived to be. So I was like, oh, interesting, because I couldn't find my niche in like what kind of parts am I going to finally get, to break out. I could go in for a lot of different things, but what's the thing that and my agents were always like, oh, it's just going to take that one part, but what a thing to,
Totally.
be associated with. So then the next phase of my career was like having to fight against whatever that was.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Well, it must have been cool having Barry, which is something that's totally the other side of the coin.
well, the first, I did a movie or two where I was like, I just want to like be in a suit and like talk normal. And, I did a few other kind of dark, villainous roles because I was like, okay, I know where my bread's buttered and while this is coming in, but I would always look for like, is there something new for me to play, like a new energy?
Yeah.
So I did a couple of those, and then I did a movie where I was like a politician, and then eventually that led to Billions, and that was the first real change where I was like, now people are seeing me every Sunday night as the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Dressed
Paul
sharp.
Giamatti,
And that was yet another kind of career changer. And that was Showtime, not HBO. But we're currently shooting our 5th season of that show. So that was a big change. And then Barry, the crazy thing about Billions is that, I'm a recurring guest star on it. Even though they ended up putting me in the pilot, I actually joined in the 2nd episode.
Wow.
And they put me back in the pilot. But I was making a movie. I almost didn't get to do it. In fact, with Michael Mayer, Spring Awakening director, we were making The Seagull with Annette Bening and
I love
Saoirse
that.
Ronan. So I was upstate New York, and they were... And then I came in, I was like up all night. We were shooting all night shoots that week. And I was like, I'm a night owl. I can do this. I'm looking at poor Annette Bening like, oh, these poor people at 4 in the morning, but I can do this. And then it happened to be a week where I got like all these auditions.
Wow.
And so I did a couple from the hotel room. And then I tried to get back on a Thursday. I couldn't get back. And then I stayed up all night shooting. And then I was like, okay, we're going to go 7 a.m., go into the city, and crank out 3 in a row. I had one at like, 10:30, one at like 11:15, and one at 12 or something. And I'm just going from room to room. And amazingly, they all went fine. I felt like underprepared. I was like, I should cancel these. And one of them was Billions. And I only knew about it because my friend David Costabile had done the pilot several months before.
NYU. Woo.
Yes, indeed, my classmate. And that was all I really knew about it.
Yeah.
And my manager repped Maggie Siff, and I knew Maggie, and but I didn't know much else about the show.
Yeah.
And it was a 1-scene thing, but something told me like this is a part that like could be something.
Yeah.
And I was back upstate to shoot again by like 4:00 in the afternoon, and I got a call. You booked Billions, but you can't do it because of The Seagull. And the weird thing was The Seagull was shot all in one house. It was all one location except for the last day, which was going to be at this theater that they had in like Armonk. And they had to have me for that day. And Billions happened to be also like a location thing with like hundreds of extras, and like Penn Jillette was swallowing fire in the scene, and it was at Cipriani Wall Street. And so neither could bend. So I was like, oh, shoot, that's too bad. And I wrote to Dave, and I said, I booked Billions, but I can't do it. And he was like, oh, well, there'll be other parts. And I was like, oh, something tells me like this was a part, And then all weekend, again, Tom Hulse was producing the movie, and he kept saying like, oh, they're wanting you for this thing, and we're trying to free you up. I was like, oh, I was told it's dead. I was like, but thank you. I'm sorry if it's an inconvenience.
Yeah.
They're like, well, we're trying to work it out with them. Another producer came up to me and said something, and Michael Mayer comes up to me and says something, all for the next several days.
Wow.
And then on like a Tuesday after that, I was like at a friend's in Princeton, New Jersey, and Michael Mayer called me and was like, I just want to tell you that we've made it so that you can do Billions.
Amazing.
And I was like, oh, well, you didn't have to do that. But that's so great. And little did I know, I guess there was an inkling, that now we're 5 years later, and I've been recurring on the show, and it's been so great. But every season of that show, I've had some other big thing. And because, I recur, they've always worked it out. So, I went and did this George Clooney movie the next year, and then I went and did Barry.
Yeah.
Where I was like against myself. That was awkward. I was like, oh, it's going to be Sunday night, opposite Billions, airing at the same time. But so many people responded because they were like, we're seeing you in both things. And I was like, again, it's a chance for people to see me as this Russian, mobster, and then as this, slick New York lawyer. And then, last year with Joker.
Yes, I'm getting a 5-minute heads up from my producer, but I got to ask you about that film, Joker. I mean, what was it like? I mean, obviously it's Academy Award nominated, but you're such an incredible performer in that, and you're such a major part of that role. And it was lovely watching what you did with that character, and and kind of the journey of your friendship turned kind of like enemy back to friendship, trying to rekindle. And spoiler alert, amazing death scene. You know, one of the funniest.
I tend to get killed a lot. I'm going to eventually edit it all together in a reel, but I keep having like another
That'd
one.
be a great
there's
demo
another
reel.
one coming, so I can't do it yet.
How was it working with Joaquin and Todd?
It was an experience. It was an experience. It was a trip. Very, very distinctive feeling. Todd and I hit it off right away. I did meet with him.
Yeah.
A couple of times, and he changed the tone of the character, and I understood it, particularly when you put it on me. You know, I had to say things like, you know, like a snub nose 48 or whatever.
Yeah.
48 snub nose, and it felt too gangstery to him. And so I came back in and we tried to, like, he took some of that language out, and I tried to, like, you know, he was like, are you going to be, you know, that New Yorkie? I was like, well, I kind of feel like it's Gotham, but it's New York.
Yeah.
But, you know, but he didn't want it to be too, you know, associated with that. So it was very collaborative, and he's an NYU guy. He went to NYU Film School.
Yeah.
And, you know, I knew him from his comedy. So to hear him talk film and to be so passionate and, you know, have written the script. And, I just kind of had a good feeling. Joaquin I'd worked with before on a movie called The Immigrant, and we had a great time. And, you know, it was right when, you know, he'd gone on David Letterman and done all this weird stuff. So I thought, what is this going to be? It was while I was doing Death of a Salesman, in fact. And then he couldn't have been sweeter. And we had lunch together, and we talked all day. You know, he had just worked with Phil in The Master.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, I don't understand how you're doing this, how Phil is doing that part. Like, he didn't understand theater. You know, I remember going back to Phil that night and saying, like, I worked with Joaquin today, and he doesn't know how you're doing it. He's like, oh, yeah, he's a great actor, but he doesn't get theater at all. Anyway, so sweet. And then I come to the Joker going, okay, at least Joaquin and I are cool. And then it was like a whole other guy. It wasn't
you
Joaquin.
didn't meet Joaquin.
It was Joker.
Yeah, that's what Shay said, too.
So, yeah, and he had lost all the weight. I mean,
Yeah.
I was really worried for him when I first saw him, because I was like, this is not the same guy.
Yeah.
So, you know, he mostly just talked to Todd, and, you know, we did oddly collaborate through doing take after take. Particularly, my earlier stuff was at the beginning of the movie, he was still finding the character. I feel like the first time we did a scene, it was a different character, and then we ended up reshooting that scene, and then they ended up cutting it again.
No way.
So for me, there was more stuff. There was a little more of an arc, so it was a little painful, you know, and it happens all the time. And everybody got cut because it really is focused on Joaquin, as it should be. It's a real character study. But, you know, that my character Randall just kind of developed with Todd. It wasn't one of those, you know, a lot of times I come in with a real plan. I like to just obsess over a script and like really start to feel it in my body before I get there. And this was one where I was like, I don't know. I really didn't know. I was like talking with the costume designer and with Todd and through throwing stuff against the wall with Joaquin, who was different every take. So it really just evolved.
I saw that on the special features, like all the 80 different versions of every same scene that he did.
Oh, really?
Take after take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a lot of stuff.
And that, I mean, that must have blown you out of the stratosphere. You probably can't walk on the subway now without a...
No, I mean, not so much. I mean, you know, I've had weeks recently where I'm like, oh, I'm getting recognized a lot. But it's, you know, it's still a lot of Billions. It's still a lot of True Detective, occasionally Barry. You know, it's funny. I'm in different places. You know, when I go to my gym, it's like all the Boardwalk Empire people come out of the woodwork. You know, you can sort of tell different, you know, the different fans. But yeah, it was cool to be in something that made $1 billion and is an international thing. And certainly the rest of my career does not reflect that.
It's
you know,
only
so
starting for you, man.
it was it's a little bit of an aberration, but it was fun to. I grew up on Batman and all that stuff, so it was fun to kind of dip my toe in that world. And, you know, that's what's being made now, you know. So for Todd to have found a way to do it in this artistic way and, you know, try to have a new take on it, you know, was really cool. And I do have to mention before we wrap up my new show For Life on ABC.
Amazing.
It's already been airing. We're a few weeks in.
Amazing.
And I'm just kind of around the first 3 or 4 weeks. And then my story gets really incredible. So I do want to say that it's a little different because it's a network show. Yeah. But it's based on a real guy named Isaac Wright Jr., who was wrongly imprisoned and became a prison paralegal and eventually a lawyer and took down the whole administration that put him away that was corrupt. And it departs from his story somewhat. It ebbs and flows, but it's strongly inspired by him. He's one of our exec producers along with 50 Cent and the writer Hank Steinberg.
And what day does that
air?
It's
on Tuesday nights at 10.
Tuesday nights
on
at
ABC.
10 on ABC.
And it's a real special show.
Yeah.
For life.
Well, Glenn Fleshler, man, you're one of the greatest actors in the world. I mean, when I put top 5, you're in my top 5, man. Like you're Daniel Day-Lewis level talented, and
stop it.
you've been such an inspiration for me, and I really, you've been a hero to mine without even You've helped me so much. Like so many of my callbacks and pins have been because like I study you, and I'm like, I gotta steal, his.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, man, you're the best. And when I talk to actors, when I do classes, when I go to one-on-one, we always talk about Glenn Fleshler. Like everyone loves you, man.
That's crazy.
You're our hero, and we're so grateful for the work you're doing. And I know the best is yet to come. And I have so much gratitude for you being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And immense love for you, and I know so much is just. I'm so excited for all that's to come.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Glenn, I love you, brother.
Thank you, man.
That was fun.